Thank you. Call to order, item 1. I now call to order the Marin Wildfire Executive Committee regular meeting of May 7th, 2026. Roll call. Martina, will you please call the roll to ensure that we have a quorum?
Certainly, starting with Director Goins,
Here.
Director Rodoni,
Here.
Director Kurtz,
Here.
Director Kohler,
Here.
and Director Hilliard.
Here.
We have a full quorum, just to inform the committee, so we do not need to take roll call vote this morning.
Great. Thank you so much. Agenda adjustments, item 3. I'll entertain requests to sorry? Okay. Are there any requests to adjust the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the Executive Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. Are there any public comments from people present or online?
And I see no hands at this time.
Okay, hearing none. We will move on to item 5, Executive Officer's Report. Executive Officer Mark Brown will present the Executive Officer's Report. Mark.
Good morning, everybody. Happy May. Wow, May. Let's see, continue to share. Don't you love it when Zoom updates things? And then you realize in the middle of a public meeting they update it, and now you have to click extra buttons. And then I get to bore you with my challenges of managing. Moving on, fuels outlook. What a weird spring. Prolonged periods of dryness, historic heat in March, then quite a bit of rain in April after the grass was starting to cure. And I was wondering how the grass was going to respond after it was already starting to cure, and then we get a significant amount of rain. And guess what? There is a regrowth that's coming back out. And so probably puts us at the same time frame that we would be at for grass fires that we would have been if we had a normal spring. If I were to put my deputy chief hat back on, I would be reminding everybody on the engine companies, though, you better make sure on your hose lays that you get water down to bare minimum soil, because there's going to be 2 layers of grass that they're going to have. So that's the challenge that they're going to be with that. And then putting my wildfire prevention hat on, that means that there's going to be more energy in our grass fires than there normally is if you just have a single growth of grass. So that's going to be interesting. Fortunately, I don't think a lot of our grazing and or mowing had already occurred. So, if you get that late growth, sometimes if you had gone mowing too soon or grazing too soon, then you're going to have a growth. But I think everything's looking good there. When it comes to our 100-hour fuels, 1,000-hour fuels, they're trending like a normal spring now. It was weird how we got there. CWPP meeting on the 2nd. You see a couple pictures up on the screen. What an amazing event. I had high expectations going into it, but I know we exceeded those expectations. Fire Safe Marin did a phenomenal job of organizing. Thank you, President Hilliard, for opening, and then Bill for your nice emceeing job. Brings a ton of positive energy. I felt good about the presentation and the panel discussion. Jacob Dadman did a phenomenal job of doing a test drive of the story map. But the most important part about that day was that bottom picture, and that is the tabling, where we had representatives from every zone, from every entity that's involved with the CWPP. We had Fire Safe Marin, we had Master Gardeners, we had Marin Wildfire staff, and we had tremendous one-on-one time with the members of the public. And credit where credit due, Larry Pissarro from Kentfield Fire suggested that we have some tabling time before the presentation. and then wrap up with a really in-depth amount of tabling time. And I think that pre-time got people energized for that, the presentation. And hats off to Catherine and Bill for actually getting people over from the tabling area to the presentation. I thought for sure it was going to take us 10, 15 minutes, but you guys got it done quick. So just a phenomenal day. Strategic planning, just know that that is on cue. We just want to get through the work plan and budget development before we dig in with the strategic planning. And after talking to members of the ops committee, they feel like they still have some unfinished business of the package that they were going to hand off to you. So we're going to have another session with ops before, and so they can have a nice complete package from the ops committee to hand off to the board. So just know that that's coming. I had the opportunity to present to a budget subcommittee for the assembly yesterday. It was in specific to home hardening and defensible space for on-property defensible space. And the perspective that I was asked to provide was from the local government perspective. And the panel that I was on, had three other gentlemen that were talking from the local government perspective. One of them from the policy space for Megafire, who works with a lot of entities for policy development, and then one of Bill's partners in the fire safe world, the executive director for the Fire Safe Council for Ventura County, and then myself. And we were really able to focus on local efforts for home hardening and defensible space, and where the state can come in alignment to support the local efforts. And my message, loud and clear, was let the locals take the lead and incentivize the locals to take the lead and have the state be in a position to support the locals. And so I think that message was heard loud and clear. I wanted to update you on the success story, a developing success story that we have in Inverness. I think I told you once before that we already had one customer get pulled off the FAIR plan. As of last week, we have 3 residents who have been pulled off the FAIR plan, and we have 2 more in the queue. And we are scheduling a meeting later this month with Mercury to expand where they're going to be having this level of outreach. Fairfax and Nicasio are the 2 areas that we're looking at, because those are the next 2 highest areas of California FAIR plan policies. And I have CSAA knocking on the door for similar actions. Yes, you bet. Yeah, go ahead.
Um, just think about this idea. Council, Vice Mayor Egger has had his fire insurance canceled like 3 times. He's done all this home hardening, and I told him to reach out to Mercury, but maybe this is not a good idea, but it might be worthwhile to consider him as a potential case study, because he's done a lot of home hardening, a lot of defensible space, and he said they just got their insurance canceled again.
Yeah.
And so they are in the Cascades, which is kind of a good test case. So just something to think about. And they're also quite elderly. Might be a good example, and he would be out there singing your praises if this happens.
Yeah. Thank you. And CSAA is knocking on the door to follow Mercury's lead. So the plan of let's get Mercury embedded, have other insurers follow them is working, and have it get Mercury excited about one area in Marin and have them expand where they are in Marin is working. And finally, I'm not going to show the infamous slide for the work plan development timeline, because I have a feeling Ann might show it for you. But I am going to say something about the work plan development that I do think I said last year, but I think it's worth repeating this year. It has not been easy to put together this work plan. It has not been easy to build this budget, nor do I think it should be easy. We're talking about $23 million of the taxpayers' dollars, and we're talking about important work. It shouldn't be easy. We should be rolling up our sleeves, working hard, and finding the best way to utilize the taxpayers' dollars to the most beneficial effect. So yes, it's been hard, but it should be. And I'll take questions.
Are there any questions or comments or suggestions? Okay, hearing none. I'll now take public comment. Is there anyone here present or online that would like to make a comment on the report?
There are no hands at this time.
Okay.
I attended the workshop on Saturday, and Bill and Mark, you all did, and kicked off by our president here, but it was really a phenomenal session. I do have to compare the picture that we have here to the picture that's on our MWPA webpage, that the audience was thinner, there were less people, and the audience was noticeably older. And one point of discussion at the session was how we reach out to younger generations, people younger than 75, 76, 60, 55. And the comments were made by several, I think it was Chief Weber who said his wife's going to lacrosse in, I don't know, Santa Rosa and lacrosse in Lafayette or something, all in one day. This is a question I think that we should ponder and this probably, Bill, it's going to be for you and your team and Mark and everyone. What are we doing to reach out to this next generation to compel, them to be informed and engaged and take action? I mean, literally the room, it looked like a snowdrift in that room. It was just, oh, not you, you weren't there, but
Excuse me?
I'm just kidding. But no, this is my point is that and maybe this is a discussion for strategic planning, Mark. Yes. And Mark, you too, by the way. Maybe this is a topic for strategic planning I think it would be of value to have a detailed conversation regards our communication strategy and demographics and what we're doing to address it. So it's a question and a comment and a suggestion. Hope I
Can we
didn't
put
offend
that
anybody.
on the agenda for the strategic planning session?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to mention that I was there for about an hour and I was afraid that everybody was going to be the snowdrift. And mine is all fake, so I could have been a snowdrift too. But I was pleasantly surprised to see a lot of younger people there. There were a lot of older people, and I think some of that is because lived experience, but the other thing is, I thought it was a packed house. When people sat down, there were very few chairs empty, so I would disagree with you. It was a totally packed house that I saw. But I think you're raising good points, is the younger people who are so busy doing other things need to also worry, and they also need to prepare. So, and a lot of them have moved into Marin, especially during COVID when everybody thought they'd never have to go back to work, so they could easily work in Silicon Valley. So I think that's a really good point, and I think it is a good point for strategic planning that we need to build this from young people up, not just us older folks who have seen too much.
I'm going to steal Bill Tyler's line. We're great at preaching to the choir. We have to expand the choir. Right?
Tell the parents to tell their kids, do it. Like that doesn't work, though, I'm sure.
Well, that's a good point, because one of the things we found with Get Ready, that in recycling, when we reach out to the kids in schools, they go home and tell their parents. So maybe that's just something to think about for strategic planning, starting to reach out to the younger kids, and then they get their parents excited.
Rachel,
Was there any exit surveys or post follow-up surveys? So I mean, it was definitely the choir there. But do we have any data around that in terms of how many people came in and had zero understanding or was brand new to the topic or anything?
No, but I think we'd be able to do that after the fact through our Firewise communities. We do have the suggestion cards that came in, but both in the form of the questions that we received and collated and passed off to Bill for the panel discussion. But we also have a handful that came in as recommendations and suggestions for the CWPP itself.
And those who registered, we have their contact information.
We didn't have a registration. It was just.
Oh, it's total,
yeah.
it's no registration.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have emails. All right.
Okay, anyone else?
I think that would have been a great idea. I was surprised when I came in that I didn't have to sign in. And I mean, that's one of the things we do. We build our email list.
Okay, we'll improve upon that next time.
Well, frankly, I thought, another opinion, the flow was easier without stumbling over having to fill out anything. I thought the way that it was arranged with the tables where you had to walk, and thank you, Master Gardeners, they brought plants. Real, look at these are the ones. And the ability to walk around, and some booths were giving out sunglasses and really talking. My problem is if I walk into a scene and I have to fill out something, it stops the flow. So I'm not quite sure how we would do this. I know assembling data is really important. So maybe next time it would be something as a registration or something. But I understand we do need to find out about, who's coming in and all that, but
And FireSafe Marin did have a pre-event registration online, and I believe did get quite a few folks registering online as well. It just wasn't mandatory. It was kind of optional.
yeah, okay, thank you. Any other comments? Well, I also want to add, was terrific. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'll now bring it back to our committee for any other discussion. If not, we'll move on. Okay. Consent calendar, item 6. The opportunity for public comment on the consent calendar items will occur prior to the committee's discussion of the consent calendar. The committee may approve the entire consent calendar with one action. In the alternative, items on the consent calendar may be removed by any committee or staff member for separate discussion and vote. I will now take public comment on the consent calendar. Is there anyone present in the room or online who wishes to make a comment on the consent calendar?
There are no hands at this time.
Okay, with no hands, there's only one item on the consent calendar, so if no committee member wishes to pull the item, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent
Before
calendar.
we do a motion, I read the minutes and I was not there. I had a budget workshop and I was noted as present, and anything that Julie McMillan said was attributed to me, and I provided that to Martina to make those corrections. So I would make a motion to approve the minutes with those corrections.
And then
So-
just for the
okay.
committee to be informed, the minutes were updated prior to the official Brown Act cutoff for the meeting
Great.
post.
All right, so I'll make a
Event.
motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
So moved by Director Kohler, seconded by Director Kurtz. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous, passes. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to item 7, discussion items. Is that right? Item A. I'm sorry, okay. So Planning and Program Manager Ann Krelock will present this item. I will, yes. So this is our FY 26-27 draft zone proposals, work plan and budget.
And I'll just make one quick statement before I hand it off to Ann. Again, the idea was last month we focused on the JPA wide, divided and conquered so that we could have more digestible month this month to talk about the zone. I do want to talk about one little thing that we have out of sequence, and I wish I would have caught this sooner. Normally, we have the ops committee meet a week prior, its last meeting a week prior to the exec committee meeting, and so that you guys are getting what the ops committee voted on. I wish I would have swapped the meetings today and asked you guys to be at 1 rather than at 10. That's on me. My apologies. So you are getting a presentation on the zone projects that is as being presented to the ops committee. So we are asking for you guys to be at the discussion level, because more than likely it's going to be the same, but there is a chance that some changes could be made. And if there's substantive changes made at the operations committee, we may come back to you and ask you to reconvene the exec committee meeting sometime next week prior to the board meeting. But that's only if there's substantive meetings or changes at the ops committee later today.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Ann.
Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Um, so today we're going to take a moment, review kind of overall what the process has been and where we are in the process. And then a very high level overview of the JPA or the zone specific proposals. Some updates regarding the JPA-wide proposals since the last time we met and discussed them, and then we'll talk about those next steps that Mark was mentioning. So this is the infamous slide. So this is really useful because I show this at basically every work plan related meeting so that we keep track of where we are in the process, what the deadlines are, etc. So right now we're at the tail end of the process. We have spent a lot of time discussing both at the strategic level and also at the project level, what our priorities should be, fine-tuning things, going back and forth on different ideas. And so it's been a really robust discussion this year. So in the month of April, we met in early April, this group met, and we discussed the JPA-wide proposals, at least where they were at the time. The ATC has also met quite a bit and really discussed the zone-specific proposals, got into the details there. The Operations Committee also discussed those zone-specific proposals in April, and the Ops Ad Hoc Subcommittee. So a few members of the Operations Committee who volunteered their time to dig into the details have met a number of times to discuss JPA-wide proposals, zone proposals, kind of think through problem solve, brainstorm, etc. And so we've had a lot of really great meetings there, and we'll report out to the larger operations committee today. And then we also met as the whole board of directors to start this discussion, so we weren't including so much content in May during the May meeting. So we discussed the JPA-wide proposals in April. And today we've got two meetings, as Mark mentioned. The Operations Committee will be meeting later on today. So everything that you'll see today is all, it all continues to be in draft form. We're looking for that input from the Operations Committee, answer some of the final questions, think through some of the proposals, and then we'll take those recommendations and incorporate that into the proposals, and we'll finalize the work plan before the May 21st Board of Directors meeting. So this slide has not changed since the last time you saw it. This reflects the 2.5% CPI and the total projected revenue, and then all the following math that happens after that. So in kind of that middle blue area, the different zones, the core dollars going to each zone, given the JPA-wide budget as it stands now, which could change this afternoon, we're not sure. But these are the draft numbers that we've had now for quite a while. And then going jurisdiction by jurisdiction, these are the local and D-space dollars allocated. That's not likely to change. Just those core dollars could change depending on how conversations go this afternoon. So this is the same slide that you've seen previously. And then looking at the JPA-wide proposals, this shows a little bit of history on that slide in terms of where we've landed for the different projects and how they've compared over time. The final work plan will include the active proposals, not the ones that are grayed out at the bottom that show kind of the history of some of the proposals out there. But it's an interesting comparison to see how things have changed or not over time. We can talk about kind of updates to the JPA-wide proposals at the end. I think we'll dive into the zone-specific proposals right now. So I'm just going to give a high-level overview of most of these proposals, maybe highlight a few that are new or different this year. Central Marin tends to be really consistent year after year. So in these slides, I've kind of grouped them by topic, not only kind of the funding bucket, DSpace, local, and core, but also by topic. I thought it was kind of a useful organizing tool for these discussions. But you have the full tables in your staff report and also in the draft chapters that are attached to the staff report. So Feel free to follow along in those large documents if you'd like. So every jurisdiction in Marin and Central Marin devotes their D-Space dollars, all of them towards the inspection program. So that's the program and the staffing and other items related to that program. So each jurisdiction contributes to that. In terms of the local dollars, there are a lot of grant and direct assistance programs. Corte Madera, Kentfield, Larkspur all have voluntary abatement programs. Sleepy Hollow has a direct assistance program. Public education, the one item related to public education in Central Marin is a demonstration garden, and that's maintenance of this existing garden from a previous fiscal year. Vegetation management, all jurisdictions are proposing to put a portion of their local dollars towards smaller invasive vegetation treatment activities around homes and roads. This has been carried on through several years now, so no change there. And then one new item for Central Marin is staff to help manage vegetation projects. So there's one position, a wildfire preparedness coordinator position, that's shared among 4 different jurisdictions. It's Fairfax, Ross, San Anselmo, and Sleepy Hollow. And then there are 4 core projects in Central Marin. These mostly have not changed, but I'll highlight the new one. So we've got additional funding for the inspection program. So another $286,000 towards the inspection program. Evacuation route, vegetation management, so vegetation management work along roads, and support for the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. One new item for this next year will be a prescribed herbivory project on open space parcels and environmental compliance around that proposal. So I'm meeting with staff, that staff member I mentioned previously, and other folks from Central Marin agencies to strategize around that and figure out what that environmental compliance would look like. Okay, moving on to West Marin. Again, within the D space kind of funding bucket, each agency contributes towards the Defensible Space Evaluation Inspection Program. So that's where those dollars go consistently across all the jurisdictions. In terms of evacuation routes, we've got Inverness evacuation route vegetation management proposed. We also have this project from Marin County Fire, CSA 3119. That is a vegetation treatment program that, if you dig into the details, is roadside vegetation management evacuation route work. So vegetation management proposals include support for chipper days, a few extra days in Bolinas, some additional work in Bolinas, really focusing on understory work and invasive non-native dead and down, trimming trees near homes, and of course that would be done within the environmental compliance constraints that we have. And then there's a new proposal from Marin County Fire, Marin Emergency Radio Authority, or MIRA, and Critical Communications Infrastructure Expanded Defensible Space. So that's vegetation management around this critical infrastructure to protect it during an incident. Then we also have a local project having to do with alerts in Stinson Beach. And that's the mobile evacuation, alerting, and warning vehicle. So that's a vehicle-mounted siren to use in emergencies. In the core bucket, we've got additional evacuation route work that Marin County Fire will take on. And then we've also got continued implementation of the Coastal Fuel Reduction Network project. So that's where a bulk of the dollars are going to be going. And that is because we have that short-term environmental compliance through the emergency proclamation from the governor's office. Moving on to Novato. Novato put all of their grants and related programs in their D-Space bucket this year. And that includes a variety of different items in the Zone 0 world that is really incentivizing removal of hazardous materials and vegetation within Zone 0. We've got vegetation management grants, defensible space grants for residents. We've got voluntary hazard abatement, the small scale veg work really around abandoned homes and lots. And we've got a home hardening and defensible space grant program. I'm kind of going from the bottom up for residents. So a variety of different ways to really get at that kind of direct assistance and for residents to do their home hardening and defensible space and a focus on Zone 0. In the local budget is a lot of staffing for inspections, for vegetation management, ignition reduction. So that's where a lot of that funding is coming from. So Novato Wildfire Mitigation Specialist, that's 4 full-time positions. Wildfire Mitigation Program Manager, that's 1 full-time position. And that person will be working both to manage vegetation management type projects and the WIMS, the inspections. Novato Fire Mitigation Ranger, and that's the ignition reduction, 1 part-time ranger. The Novato Wildfire Mitigation Program equipment, that's equipment related to a variety of different items, erosion control, safety, monitoring, outreach, etc. And then in core, some additional funding for staffing because it takes people to do all of this work, including vegetation management specialist and a senior vegetation management specialist. In grants, additional funding for the grant program and direct assistance and some hazardous vegetation removal, and that's really direct assistance around vegetation around homes. And then work along roads and fire roads, Northeast Novato evacuation routes, and these are kind of categorized by CEQA documents. So the Northeast Novato Evacuation Routes Project, and then also the Novato Evacuation Routes, basically the roadsides in Novato that are covered under various CEQA documents. And then fire road maintenance. So you may recall that Novato completed an inventory of its fire roads, so doing some work along those fire roads. Generally vegetation management. And then in terms of public education, a Fire Smart demonstration garden, Fire Adaptive Multimedia Campaign, that's a continuation of their public education program. So in terms of the vegetation management projects, Valley Memorial Park eucalyptus removal and revegetation. So we're continuing to do monitoring and habitat restoration there. Once the eucalyptus trees were removed, now you've got your wetland back. So now it's more of a wetland restoration. We're working with California Department of Fish and Wildlife with the permit there and making sure to meet all those requirements and have some native plants there for habitat. Ignacio Valley fuel break maintenance. So a lot of these are repeats of previous year's projects, and now we're in maintenance mode. So we've got the Ignacio Valley fuel break, Novato open space, fuel reduction work, Marin Highlands, Novato Bahia, Marin Valley goat grazing maintenance, and the Greater Novato shaded fuel break. So continued implementation and maintenance of these projects. In San Rafael, we've got under the D-Space bucket, staffing for the inspection program and vegetation management. This item is, you'll see it pop up in a number of different locations. So partial funding through this bucket, partial funding elsewhere, and that's to fund 7 positions that work in both the vegetation management and the defensible space world. And then additional funding for the defensible space program. And then public education includes their public education outreach and engagement program. That's a continuation from previous years. You'll see that pop up in another location also. And then some residence assistance, so direct assistance for home hardening and defensible space. In Marinwood, they're also contributing towards the defensible space inspection program, helping fund the staff and et cetera for that program. Also in local for San Rafael, staffing for, again, support for the inspection program and vegetation management and the ignition reduction. So that includes the ranger who's doing work to reduce ignitions in public places. In public education, continued public education program, and also some landscape maintenance of the Fire Smart garden at 618 B Street. Additional local projects, vegetation management. So a fire hardened trails pilot, you'll see this in a couple of different locations, I believe, or maybe it's just local now. So this is vegetation management to explore the idea of turning trails into mini fuel breaks. So this is at a specific location, the Harry Barbier Park, and this is a pilot program to do veg work along trails. The Southern Heights Ridge Fuel Reduction Project, this is a new project that we'll be working on CEQA for. This is vegetation management and CEQA work at the southern edge of San Rafael. The San Rafael Small and Responsive Projects proposal, this continues from year to year. These are small scale hazardous vegetation, hazardous tree issues, things like that, really around the built environment. Landscape restoration is focused on going in after a vegetation project where fuel is removed, but perhaps you want to install some fire-safe native plants in the area. The Deer Valley Fuels Reduction Project, this is part of that initial study mitigated neg deck project that you've seen previously. This will ramp up work in that portion of that project area. They've been working on San Rafael Hill, but haven't started on Deer Valley yet. They've also included another funding source for general environmental compliance. This will probably help with the Southern Heights Ridge Fuel Reduction Project and also help fund bird surveys and other things that come up to supplement the overall JPA-wide environmental compliance bucket. Then another newer project is the City Park Risk Reduction item, and this is for visiting city-owned parks and the non-landscaped areas that are still overgrown and potentially fire hazardous, so doing some work in those locations. Marinwood CSD's local work includes ongoing fuel reduction work around the built environment, specifically around homes. San Rafael's core includes grants and related, so kind of direct assistance for residents to do home hardening and defensible space. And then that additional staffing proposal, so additional funding for those 7 positions that I mentioned that work both in the defensible space and inspection world and also vegetation management. And then we've got additional funding for the ranger. Vegetation management proposals include maintenance of previously approved open space fuel reduction projects. The Flashy Fuels project that includes Marinwood and San Rafael, that's a grazing project, so continued grazing on parcels. San Rafael San Anselmo Fuel Reduction Zone project, this budget is small because there's rollover from previous years, and so work will continue, but we're going to utilize the rollover more than new funding. And then San Rafael Hill will continue with vegetation management there. We've gotten started this year. There have been about 100 piles burned recently. We hosted a field trip there recently. They've got another 150 piles to burn and more work to do on that parcel. And then critical infrastructure, this is looking at the infrastructure in San Rafael, both before, during, and after a wildfire, taking an inventory and trying to figure out what, if any, improvements need to be made and making them. Additional core proposals, alerts and evacuations. So a lot of outreach around emergency alerts, registration and evacuation awareness. So trying to get folks to sign up, raise awareness around that. Evacuation route related work includes vegetation management along roads, evacuation planning and implementation. This project is particularly interesting because it really dives into not only kind of alerts, but also the traffic component of evacuation. So looking at specific areas and hiring a consultant and coming up with evacuation plans, detailed plans to get people out of those areas and onto Highway 101. Safe parking guidelines includes parking boxes and related items, really looking at the road network, especially windy, narrow areas to get evacuation, to make evacuations more efficient and also get first responders in. Fire roads, so San Rafael's been looking at their fire roads. They're also part of that larger county-wide or JPA-wide inventory of fire roads. So looking at the fire roads and assessing what kind of needs to be done in terms of vegetation management and other activities. Data tools and modeling. Santa Fe has been part of the pilot program for the Xyla plan, the fire pathways modeling and the urban conflagration modeling, and they're really looking at doing that zone wide. And so that'll be really interesting to see what results from that. Then moving on to Southern Marin, in terms of defensible space, so staffing again for the inspection program and also vegetation management activities. We've got the fire marshal, we have vegetation management specialist, 2 positions, defensible space inspector in Mill Valley, also paying into that defensible space program and also vegetation management support. In Muir Beach, they also contribute towards the defensible space program and that staffing and related costs. And in terms of vegetation management, they've got a D-space project for some work around homes, really. Southern Marin Local will include staffing for, again, the inspection program, also their alert program related to their sirens, so continuing that work and reaching out to residents to see who heard what sirens and tracking that. Vegetation management includes a community fuels management piece. So again, that's vegetation management in the built environment, and equipment for vegetation management. Mill Valley local dollars includes support for the inspection program, some public education, a fire safe garden, contributing to the alert network and notifications, and then also community fuels management, so vegetation management in the built environment. Muir Beach, this is my one photo. There was so little text, I wanted to add a photo. So this is along Highway 1 in Muir Beach, some of the work that we have been doing with national parks. So Muir Beach local public education, they support their local Firewise group and work closely with them. And some vegetation management that includes equipment or dollars towards equipment. In Southern Marin, core dollars includes quite a bit of direct assistance for home hardening defensible space. So they've created these community adaptation programs or CAPS in various locations. And that is related to directly helping residents do home hardening defensible space in Zone 0 and potentially collaborating with the Ember Ready program. And I would say the same for Novato and Santa Fe. They've been really thinking about the Ember Ready program and how to collaborate. And so I would expect many of those related proposals in those chapters also include a component of working with Kathleen and Joe and the Ember Ready program and being proactive about reaching out to communities. And then this is Southern Marin's version of that work. So a lot of emphasis on Zone 0 and home hardening and defensible space in the built environment in all of the zones, really. In Southern Marin, continuing with vegetation management, those projects that you've already seen. And there's one newer project, the Tamalpais Homestead Valley Fuel Break. We've got a fuel break in kind of the northern section of that. We'll extend that south and we'll need to do the CEQA associated with that. So we'll pretty much double the size of that project and do the CEQA. So Sausalito Forest Health Project, continued implementation of that. Ring Mountain, Greater Mill Valley Fuel Break, and there's a small fuel break in Muir Beach along a trail, and then some equipment to support this work. Evacuation route related work includes continued work in Muir Beach along Highway 1, continued work in the Terwilliger area in Muir Beach. We've been working on hazard tree removal, as you know, and other vegetation management in the understory, and then work on Highway 1 on the non-federal side. So those are the zone-specific proposals. I'll just note, part of the process today with the Operations Committee will be to revisit those, think through any changes, any edits. We're always fine-tuning and trying to catch typos or omissions in the chapters. those chapters will go back out to the zones, and I'll get a few more edits, no doubt. So the final versions, we'll be working on finalizing all those chapters for you all to see on May 21st. And then I want to note, since the last time we spoke, some changes have happened to JPA-wide proposals, or at least they'll be discussed at the Operations Committee today. One is the grant program. We've been, or we, the larger we, I get no credit in this at all, but the chiefs and the Defensible Space Alliance have been talking a lot with Fireside and others to really think through how they'd like to see this, this program move forward. And one of the ideas is working with Fireside, who now has a grant management platform that has already been rolled out and tested elsewhere, and we could really benefit from. So they're exploring working with Fireside there, and that could provide a lot of efficiencies and a really good kind of user interface for the public to really see where they are in the grant application process. So that's exciting. The communications coordinator will discuss again at the operations committee and get their input today, but we've gone from, the communications coordinator potentially being a Marin Wildfire employee to potentially being housed under Fire Safe Marin. Now the Ops Ad Hoc Subcommittee is thinking that perhaps it's better under Marin Wildfire. So we'll discuss that more today. So I don't have a definitive change, but that'll be part of the discussion at the Operations Committee today. And then in terms of public education, we'll be discussing again at the Operations Committee, working through the scope of work and the budget and what we gain or lose with different price points with that item. And so Bill Tyler will help us with that discussion as well, but we'll be having that with the full Operations Committee today. So again, 1 p.m. today is that meeting. And then we'll take that input from the Operations Committee. They'll likely have some guidance, some edits. I'll be working with the member agencies to finalize those chapters and work through any edits that need to happen. And then we'll get them all formatted, table of contents, and then we'll get that to you for the May 21st meeting so that we can discuss in full with the full board of directors. And then after the Operations Committee meeting today, I'll be able to kind of tally up dollars. I'll have a better idea for how many dollars are going towards grants, how much is going towards vegetation management projects, evacuations, etc. And so I'll have those numbers for you on May 21st. So that's the end of my report. Mark, is there anything I missed that you'd like to add?
No, but I think you can see how much work has gone into this, and we are making a difference. There's no doubt about that. I did want to mention that 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Ann and I will be meeting with the finance team. We have the budget framework. Then we'll take the numbers that were recommended by the ops committee, put it into the full budget, and that'll be for the finance committee meeting on Monday morning. Short turnaround.
Thank you so much. Okay. That was really a lot of information. We read it, we saw it, and now I'm sure we have comments. Okay, so Director Goins?
Just one quick, did
Oh,
you want me to
yeah.
share that or no?
The question, I guess, Catherine, would you like to go through the zone projects and then talk about the Fire Safe Marin, or would you like to have Bill talk about where we're at with the Fire Safe Marin work plan, scope of work, and all that first?
Let me ask the board, what would you like to do, committee?
Yeah, I think.
A couple questions about zone specific. APA projects are another matter. I think it's going to get too complicated if we get the whole package and have to kind of roll all through the whole package. So I'd suggest that we take a moment for questions before we move on to JPA wide and the presentation.
Any objections from the committee members? Okay, we'll do that. So now, Bruce, would you have a question? Go ahead. Or comment.
A great, incredible package. I'm just blown away. All the hands and hearts and Mark, the state that we're making a difference. It's astounding, this package. So thanks for all the work, everybody. I do have a question. There's one project we've not done before, which is it is a San Rafael Fire Road maintenance project, and I read that. Sorry,
use this mic. That one's cutting.
Oh. I think this is the first time that we've proposed going in and maintaining a surface road. And my question is the applicability of CEQA to, I understand the project is to assess the road for its needs. And there's grading and there's drainage. And these are things that I think are probably exempt under CEQA. But if there's any realignment of a fire road with a cat, D6, 7, 8, and you're pushing dirt and you're moving dirt, I'm not sure that it's exempt. And so I would just ask, and I'm not looking for an answer now, that Mark and Ann, that as you look at that project, if there is determination of realignment, that you do take a look at the CEQA requirements for some CEQA analysis prior to realigning in existing road alignment. So that's it's a question and a comment for you. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Hey, Director Kohler.
Yeah, I appreciate the staff report. It's a nice overview. I'm wondering, since your presentation had even a little bit more, if we could get a copy of the presentation, that would be good. And I think you mentioned this, Anne, for the 21st, will we have a little bit more of an overall summary? I think you mentioned this. So for example, Novato, San Rafael, maybe even Southern Marin are doing their own grants programs. I think it's just those two. If we could have like an overview of how much money we're putting into grants overall, because it gets lost in the shuffle. And then the same thing with home, the veg management or D-space for those things. If we could have like a big picture, that I think would be a nice sort of summary, because nobody's going to look at, I mean, we will, but regular people won't look at how much we're spending on grants, how much we're spending on chipper days overall, everybody wrapped in, and some of the other things. If we could have like a nice summary table, I think that would be quite helpful.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a big fan of charts and pie charts and graphs to help explain the data. Well, I'll definitely have that ready for you for the
So I'm not as visual, but other people are. I think the charts and graphs are good, but a table just saying bottom line, how much we're spending on all of it would be great on the big ticket categories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And right now, we're generally somewhere around $3 million for grants and direct assistance across the JPA. And so if you add that up with all of the inspection programs, we're somewhere around $7+ million going towards home hardening, defensible space, direct assistance, the inspection programs, and that built environment.
Director Adoni.
And thank you. Obviously, a lot of work's gone in this, and I have a lot of faith and trust in the subcommittees and the zones that work on this. But from a high level, I just want to remind everyone that our ballot language specifically says we shouldn't be supplanting any costs that were paid for previously. Some of the descriptions, brief descriptions, would raise questions to me if I was looking at the work plan from that perspective. So my question really is around, how do we check in on that? And I realize it may be difficult to go in depth. And as we do that, do we require our entities to sign anything yearly saying we are not supplanting any other costs by this MWPA dollar? So if you can just fill us in and remind us about that a little bit.
You bet. I'll answer the second question first. Yes, every single project proposal requires an official within that organization to say that they are not supplanting previous. The next question is, we've had some in-depth conversations at our ad hoc committees about the supplanting and also about alignment with measure language. And if you look at the language, there was a lot of gray areas built into the JPA. The board has yet to opine on exactly what the definition of supplanting is. And the board has not had the opportunity to really dig into exactly what are measurable or allowable costs under Measure C. There's not been a board policy at that. So Any of these projects that are on the fringe, we are looking at those as placeholders and using the strategic planning process for the board to be able to go through and have that conversation about the definition of supplanting and the definition of what an allowable cost is. That way we can have it in a open environment, not attached to an individual project and or emotions or really pressed timeline. So we can have a thoughtful discussion and come to the right conclusion rather than a rushed conclusion.
I really appreciate that. And I think the conversation is important as we're looking forward to going to the renewal. I
Yep.
think we owe that to the voters. And so I appreciate moving forward with that. Thanks.
Director Kohler. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Kurtz, did you have one?
Thank you.
Yes.
Definitely. I mean, the level of conversation we're having every year is getting much more sophisticated and fine tuning the work. So it shows where we're going with the progression. So appreciate the work of the ATC and ops, and those are the expert areas. And so I'm looking at this from our perspective of really what is our role, and to Dennis's point, and the higher level. So the one thing, not obviously for this round, but going forward, it seems that there are some projects that are classified under D space, some that are classified under local, and they're very similar. They sound the same. And I don't know if we want to look at, again, back to the strategic planning conversation, the definition of what falls in. I mean, they're all fine. It makes sense, but what falls under D space, what falls under local, and maybe we have a better, and maybe we don't need to have that, but it feels it's confusing to understand where things fall. And so that's my perspective on that. I do think we're seeing also the level of maturity of the work that's being done, that whether you call it supplanting or not, I think there's an expectation that we are looking at some of our infrastructure and work that has to be done. And I'd put LRADs in there, I'd put MIRA in there, I'd put fire roads in there. And there's a lot of those listed across all the zones of those types of projects. Those might be, so we might need to look at also defining what is infrastructure and where does that fall under D-space, core, local, how does that fit in to the work that we're doing?
I also would like to add that what this is doing is illuminating for us where we have a policy vacuum and where we can, out of our strategic plan and out of all of your concerns, come up with the appropriate policies. I'm sorry. So Director Kohler, you had something
Yeah, I
else?
just wanted to follow up on the issue of supplanting. So some of us, before there was Measure C, scraped together some dollars to do things like our own chipper days. We never could have continued that. So I also think that's part of a policy decision that we discuss during, that just because we did a couple of things, does that mean that we can't use Measure C dollars? And I think that's part of strategic planning, because there was no Measure C and we tried to do some stuff. And, Fairfax did a couple of things, but never could have continued those. And I know some of the bigger organizations did even more. So while that is the ballot language, I think we need to really discuss that and how that works.
Totally agree. And we wanted to make sure that those conversations were in the right space. And we didn't feel that in the rush of budget planning and work plan development, that was the right space for those conversations. So we found a way to be able to get that conversation into the right environment.
Thank you all. Any other comments? Otherwise, now I will take questions from the public. Are there any other? I'm sorry, am I doing something wrong? Okay.
No, you're fine. You can either take it now or just wait and do all public comment at the very end, because we're still going to hear for the rest of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So Chief
Okay.
Tyler, you have something? Do you?
And I'll open it up for Bill. As we worked through the JPA-wide proposals and we presented a well vetted. A lot of time went into the scope of work for Fire Safe Marin. We had a $1 million placeholder. When Fire Safe Marin scoped the proposal, they could not hit the proposal at 1 million. And so what we asked them to do is to be able to present to us what we would be missing if we stay at the $1 million placeholder. And that's where Chief Tyler will be able to walk us through. Again, this is for discussion, not any decision for you guys, because this is going to be the exact same conversation that Bill will have with the Operations Committee. And so we'll see what comes out of the Operations Committee.
If you can just give me a moment, it appears my screen is not showing up there as it is on my laptop here.
Go back to.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So my screen is still sort of messed up here. You see? I don't know how to get rid of that. Okay, thank you for that. So I want to thank the Executive Director, Mark Brown, for giving me an opportunity to give you a preview of the presentation I'm going to make to the Operations Committee. I was able to meet with the ad hoc committee on April 20th, gave them sort of an overview that included some of these numbers, and was asked to come back and show what we could deliver on at $1 million, essentially. So what I'm going to do is just take a couple slides for context, and then we'll get into the numbers specifically. So just background in terms of contract with MWPA, our existing contract expires on June 2026. We did have an initial agreement at the beginning of the MWPA for 2020. It was then revised in 2023 that had 2 one-year extensions by mutual agreement. Those extensions were always tied to a work plan that we developed and then budget numbers that we thought we needed to be able to deliver on that. The 2026-27 scope of work is aligned with the new strategic measures, and it was developed by the MWPA ad hoc group that was working together to come up with these, including Charlotte, Mark, and others. Fire Safe Marin has provided costs for the scope of work by program. And I'll go over that. MWPA has assigned $1 million to public ed in the draft document. We did request that we stay flat in that initial number, but 1 million is what was put into the budget, and a new line item came forward, which was for a communications coordinator. So this program of work was developed by the ad hoc working group, informed by agencies, connected to the new strategic measures under public education goals. Just as a high level for a reminder, Program 1 is to develop and coordinate new and existing Firewise communities. Program 2 is supporting residents in implementing their defensible space and home hardening. Program 3 is professional training and education programs for strategic partner organizations. And Program 4 is the community events. When we've costed out all of this programmatic work, we came with up to $1.3 million. So how much does the proposed plan cost? Again, we say it's 1.3. And we're looking at doing that over 4 years with an annual increase. So 1.3 every year for 4 years with annual increases for cost of living. The way we get to that number is that first is people, which is a combined staff and a production team that we've built over the years. So that is very close to $1 million. Then we've got the required business expenses that goes in standing up Fire Safe Marin so that we can do what we do. That's $61,000. And then there are program expenses that are tied to each one of those programs. That's almost $241,000 for a total of $1,300,000. So what's the cost of each program? We provided a range that we could deliver as efficiently and effectively as possible. The low end of that range was $1,100,000. And then the higher range to deliver on everything that we think done the way that it needs to be done is the $1,300,000. We use a time allocation methodology that distributes the costs across the program. So the staff and the production team end up contributing to each one of the programs, and there are shared infrastructure costs. And then each one of the programs are priced at that cost of the contribution to the overall model. So if you try and reduce one of the pieces, it's not going to be proportional. We would have to change slightly. That is, it's not sort of an a la carte thing. And let me give you an example here. See if this. So this is the image. It is the cost by program. And so this was shared with the ad hoc committee. And it'll be made available to you as well. So like with program 1, that estimated cost range, that 275,000 to the 305, at 275, that's the people and the administrative costs essentially. And then to go to the 305, it's $30,000 spread across these sort of sub-bullets, if you will, subscriptions, the cash operations, printed materials, etc. And then program 2 is very similar. It's got the people and the staff to make that work, and then it's $140,000 of other deliverables. And it's similar as you walk down. So basically what we're saying is for people, our production team and the administrative cost is that low end at that 275, the 270, the 165, the 190, and then the 160. So the areas that we would be reducing are that total that is just over $200,000.
When you say production team, is that contractors? I don't know what
They're
that means.
contractors, yeah. So
Okay,
it means our videographer,
Okay.
creative, person that helps us put
Okay.
things together, et cetera. Let me.
And just to note, the numbers being presented are in your packet, are in the proposal. The document itself is not, but the numbers are there.
Can you do the screen sharing again for me? It stopped for some reason.
And where are they in the packet? All I see is the zone proposals.
If you look at one of the attachments to the staff report, one of the attachments is the JPA-wide chapter, and the proposal in there for public education includes the numbers.
Okay.
And while we're waiting for Centerfeld zone proposal, I saw some public education in there. Also, can you tell us how that interplays with Fire Safe Marin's work? Does it mean Fire Safe Marin won't work in Centerfeld and Novato because they're doing their own program? How does that work?
Well, it definitely, begs the question for, or is related to the communication coordinator position and helping to facilitate efficient communication and public education among all the different member agencies. Santa Fe and Novato have decided to go with their own kind of messaging and flavor for a lot of the items that go out that is focused towards their communities and the needs that they see in their community. Mark, do you want to say more on that?
But they still lean on the base content that Fire Safe Marin is creating and then modify it to meet the more flavor and demands and needs for their individual communities.
So essentially we're asked what do we lose if we drop it down to a million? So essentially, our people production team is close to $1 million, the required business expenses. So our minimum total required would be $1,060,000 essentially. And if we're only provided $1 million, we have a $60,000 shortfall. So the way we would intend on closing that shortfall is we would have immediate cuts to the production team by $60,000. The community ambassador program would be suspended. We would attend events with staff only. We would lose coordination of the Ember Stomp event, so that would have to be picked up by another agency or entity. We would not be able to affect a media buy or any of the countywide campaigns. And the media buy is extensive. It's a year-long commitment to reach all 260,000 residents in Marin County with important information on risk reduction. We would have no ability to print materials. And so anything above this would have to be grant funded. And we do go out and pursue grants. Before I get into that, I just want to say what remains intact. So our staff remains intact. The website with all of the information that folks are directed to that's used broadly. We would have some reduction in the phased delivery of the program. That is, we might not be able to make the kinds of impacts that we'd like to do given the metrics that have just been delivered. So some of those will be throttled back. We will still be able to have support for our member agencies with content and toolkits because we're able to develop and create that things. And that information will be pushed out through our organic communication networks like our newsletters, social media, and e-blasts. We still can respond to the public inquiries with their emails, calls, and social media. We have a standard of replying within 24 hours to all inquiries. We can still support Firewise in development of their action plans, risk assessments, renewal process, and support the leaders. And we can also still offer professional trainings that will be delivered by the staff. So how else do we close the gap in funding? It's through grants. And I want you to know that since 2020, FireSafe Marin has secured over $1.7 million in grants that have gone directly to support MWPA programs above and beyond what we receive in our budgeted funds from MWPA. We leverage a California Fire Safe Council Community Coordinator grant that we have applied for an extension this year. We have not received it yet. But if we receive that, if received deliverables exist outside of MWPA for that fund. So for example, we have to perform audits by receiving that grant. We have to, and funds will come out of that grant to be able to do it. We have to do certain GIS components, et cetera. But a lot of the requirements for receiving that grant are in direct alignment with the mission of FireSafe Marin and the MWPA. Historically, that grant has been applied to the FireSafe Marin executive position. So essentially, the state has been paying for the director, which is my position for the last 3 years. We do have existing grants that help offset some of the costs. So for example, there's that one pending, like I said, it's for $151,500. Again, 12,000 of that would go towards the audit. So that would be less that amount. We also have in progress a Marin Community Foundation contractor training grant for $220,000, which we're about halfway through at this point. And so again, what we would do if we do receive that, given $1 million and then receiving the California Fire Safe grant, what we would do is first $12,000 would come off. We would be able to restore our production team to whole. That's that $60,000 gap. And then we would restore the ambassador program to be able to go to the events, which we think is critical. And then we would have a little bit of money to be able to deal with increases just in higher costs to deliver goods. Basically, that $1 million takes us back to funding levels of 2022. So Our minimum recommendation back to the full ops committee today is going to be $1,150,000 as the minimum. And what that represents is a 5% overall budget for the MWPA, which is in line with comparable authorities that invest in the community. So other agencies, when they have funds, how much do they put towards education and outreach? 5% is often an average number. So we would not recommend going below that. This number keeps staffing and the production team intact. It recognizes inflation and increase in operational expenses. It reduces the media buy in half, but it will maintain flexibility for some premium ad placements, some discounted rates and efficiencies when we buy that kind of advertising at scale. The California Fire Safe Coordinator grant will enhance that new scope of work, so we'll apply it directly back into the MWPA. We ask that the MWPA seek grants for public education on our behalf so that, and we will continue to go after grants ourselves, for example, state capacity grants. And so that is what will happen if we go back to $1 million. And so this is the branding on the funding that we're required to post, which we have on our website in different places after receiving the coordinator grant funding. That's the end of my report.
Thank you. Now, I'll take questions and comments. Director Kurtz.
Thanks for the update. It's good to see this level of detail. You talked about comparable agencies. I was wondering which ones you've looked at.
We've looked at the NFPA. We looked at the local water district. Those are two that are right off the top of my head, but there was about 5, and I can share that list with you.
Did you happen to look at Marin Transit? Because they do a lot of community, and I've been working with them recently, and they do a lot of community outreach right now. Their budget's 50 million in operations, and they have 2% towards marketing and outreach. So that's $1 million on a 50 million operating budget. And similar, like they're at a lot of community events, a lot of ads trying to reach out to the community. So I'm sort of wondering if that is a good comp, if Marin Transit was in your mix of comps, and why there's that difference.
Yeah, and I would just say there are a range, right? So 5% is a range. You've got some that are, let's say you use 2% as the low end, 2% up to, say 12% or something. You end up somewhere in the middle. I think it's not just the number. It's what's the number to become effective with that communication transfer. What is it going to take? And we've been operating just below that 5%, and you can kind of see the results that we have with the public so far, and why we think it's important to increase those investments in communicating with the public to move action. And that's why the measures are in place now to try and that's why the scope has changed to really try and drive that.
How much new material are you anticipating creating? Because we have a lot of current fire safe Marin materials. And a lot of that is getting out, and there's a consistency of look, feel, conversation, branding, marketing. Are you anticipating creating a lot of new material?
There is new investments, there's new relationship building, additional surveys, and trying to develop programs that will actually move those measurements. So, for example, instead of just working with Firewise in a way that can grow them, it's how do we work even more closely with Firewise to encourage them to step up and do more, even more than they're doing now. How do we give them training and programs and take some of the things that are difficult from them and give them new ways of doing it in order to become more effective to reach those? A lot of times what you see is a very active leadership in Firewise, but then very quickly it starts to drop off. So let's just say you have 100 homes, you might have, say, 3 to 5 people that are super active doing all the work, and then the others that aren't doing a lot. So what we're being tasked to do is to try and get into those Firewise communities more deeply and interact with them more effectively. So that's going to require new ways of doing things.
As one of those 5 on a Firewise community, I get it. So,
Yeah.
Nope, I understand. All right.
I'm sorry. Bruce, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yep. Thanks for the details, Bill. This is this is above and beyond what we've seen in previous years. And I know that we are maturing as an agency. We do have the public information education goal and the metrics that have been identified. I did read the proposal. It makes sense to me. I like the fact that you're tying the 5 item areas to specific objectives that we've identified in our strategic plan. So thank you. I have one question and one comment. The question is, do you, in process, if the ad hoc team that talked about public information education metrics, we actually envisioned, rather than and I'll just say this arbitrary dollar amount being cast out for public education, the task, as we envisioned it, and Julie isn't here, but it was Julie that actually made the statement, would be for our team and Fire Safe Marin to build out a program and a budget. So I'm seeing kind of conflicting forces here, just as an observation. I trust the ops team to make, make some great recommendations. I want to thank you. I just became aware this year that little did we know how much money Fire Safe Marin has brought to Marin for public information education, which I think we give no credit. So I think you're due credit, and I think that should be recognized in this process. So I think that's about all I have at this point. Thank you.
I appreciate the comments. I mean, it will be an interesting discussion today at Ops, to finally kind of have the time to be able to do that. It's difficult to ask agencies to kind of cut back in some of the things that they think are so important, to deliver on, because it's going to come from somewhere. And Director Kurtz had said that before. But what I think I'm seeing too is that more agencies looking at that education core and designing things that they think that they want to deliver. And it does, in my view, take away from other agencies and what they can do. And the dollars that are spent at the agency level are going to go less far than they will when they're spent from a nonprofit. And so just the hands that it goes through of at those higher costs, and you lose some economies of scale. You also lose a common standard message. So of the close to $320,000 that agencies are pulling down from the public education core, I'm not aware that those items are tied to the measures. And so that's another question that I would be asking. Because we can show how ours are drawn in a straight line between the goals to the measurements. I'm not sure that consideration was given that for, say, garden maintenance, for example.
Director Calder.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Bill. I think that was really good the way you split it out and discussed, how things fit with our mission. Really appreciate that. A couple of things that I worry about, and I think I'm sort of piggybacking on what Director Rodoni said is, you mentioned it just now, but looking at San Rafael, 125,000 for public education, I thought what we're trying to do is we're trying to consolidate things. And so by having a communications coordinator at Marin Wildfire, that's one attempt to have everything go up into one point person, but also having Fire Safe Marin doing that work that is really tied to our mission rather than giving different messages out, to me is one of the keys to why I would look to try to maintain as much as possible in Fire Safe Marin. And I've seen you guys grow. I mean, before you were there, when it was just totally lean and mean, it was Rich and a couple other people. But I do feel that we need to really think about this as we do public education and really look at why do we have differing messages out there? Now, some of that may be that there's a specific need in a community, but we are Measure C and we are a 17-member agency that really needs to focus on getting our message out. So I worry about, you know, we have other programs where people are doing separate things that are probably good, but maybe very different from what the overall goals are. So I'm concerned about the cuts and trying to look at, I think what you've done is also giving us sort of a bare bones, how you'd like to see if we can augment. So I don't think that's a huge ask. And I also think your mention of the Firewise communities, and Rachel says, so in our Firewise community, one of my best friends is the person. And, you know, I don't have time. I love her, but I'm not doing it. And other people in our community are just blowing it off. And so we have something like 90 Firewise communities. They are our boots on the ground.
Mhm.
You know, when it comes down to it, a firefighter is not going to be knocking on your door. It's going to be your neighbors. So I think you mentioning that you want to really expand that and get, you know, first there's the energy and then it wanes and then it wanes. So we have Joanne Lanier in my Firewise doing it on her own.
Mhm.
So I think that is a really important point. The boots on the ground is what we need. The people in our communities that we trust, like Rachel in her community, are the ones who are really going to spread the message. So I think you guys focusing on that change is really important. I mean, I know Rich has said to me, we have too many Firewise communities. We have a lot of people who say they're Firewise, but it's not really happening anymore. And I wonder, even where we have one, are there some where there's no activity anymore? So I like that, and I would also suggest to you to highlight, as you talk to the Ops Committee this afternoon, other areas where you think, you know, the ambassador program, getting trusted folks in communities to speak to folks is great. So thank you, Bill, and I'm hopeful that the Ops Committee will expand or augment what has been proposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to take privilege here. I think where we are is, I'm thinking yours, mine, and ours in terms of everybody's public outreach programs. And this is a great focusing point for wildfire for the whole county. And so I'm counting on the Ops Committee and on the ATC and your input to get us to the right place where we have a really good balance and everybody understands what their role is at the local level, our role, but the messaging for overall for the county. And I think this is, thank you for the details and for defending the program, because it doesn't need defense, but I mean, telling us the elements that we would lose. That was really excellent. So I'm anxious to hear what the Ops Committee has to say and to get their input. So are there any other comments? Okay, Rachel.
I just want to make sure as it goes to the Ops Committee that it's really clear, and I know this is happening at ATC and Ops already, is that the prioritization of all those items, like we can't do everything all at the same level and even increasing it. I mean, I just think that, you know, marketing is one of those hard things. You reach a level of, what is the phrase about return?
Saturation.
Saturation, right? There's a level of saturation and we're not if the bang for the buck type of thing. But if we say, great, Firewise communities and ambassadors and personal outreach is the trigger that encourages home hardening and encourages people being prepared, or is it an add-on a bus? You know, I have my own idea, but you know, I think that's where those dollars should be put in. I think, you know, $1 million is a lot in marketing and management and communication, especially with all the other work that needs to be done. I would be at this point, again, looking at the number of what are new, is there a new program or a new initiative really that needs to have that level of investment? Is there, you know, where do we need to put that money and those funds. And so I look forward to hearing the ops conversation around that. It is all super, super important. But as we saw on Saturday, we're talking a lot to the choir. And that, is that the material and the messaging, is it going to change with more marketing? I'm not sure. So again, I think it'll be good conversation to have. It's a lot of money. I mean, it's still a lot within our budget. And I support marketing and communication. That was our biggest initiative as we were coming out in 5 years ago, that we had to have that. And it's done a huge amount of understanding of what the community needs to do. There's no doubt. I just want to make sure that we can't just keep continuing to fill that bucket in around marketing communications without really making sure we have that prioritization clear and the goals.
Okay, so added on to that, our discussion that we are going to do in the strategic planning section, I think the return on investment is something that we will see. I've asked if we can have that as part of in the annual report, add on a section that says we've contracted with these people. This is what the outcome is. This is what our return on investment looks like. I think we can do the same thing you're showing us. We can do more to say what the benefit is for each of these things. So this is an opportunity again. So those are my comments. I'm just looking at this as an opportunity. Are there any other comments? Director
Yeah,
Radoni?
just a quick comment. Part of this discussion includes the communication coordinator, and I'm not sure that there's a trade-off here, but I'm seeing it kind of is a trade-off. If we do the communication coordinator, we may not have funding to fully fund Fire Safe Marin. So I think my question is around what would the communication coordinator bring to this organization that we don't already have through our efforts with Fire Safe Marin? Or is that being driven by the fact that some of our member agencies want to do education on their own, which means we have to help coordinate it to make it work for us? And I'm trying to figure out what's driving that, if you could help me understand.
Yeah, you bet. And we did, and what I'll make sure we have is Jean Bonander available at the board meeting when we would discuss this. She and Pam Kuhn led a series of discussions, more than approximately 25 different conversations with our member agencies, looking at our communications, where we've been challenged, where we've succeeded. And as Abe Roman put it for the chief of San Rafael Fire, when we first started talking about the communications coordinator, he goes, well, Mark, that should be what Marin Wildfire is already doing. And I totally agree with him. And the gap that we had was a lack of an individual that was able to know exactly who the communications person was at the County of Marin that needed to be connected to this particular topic. If it's DSpace, it's one person. If it's vegetation management, it's another person. And multiply that by 17 member agencies and trying to bring those entities all together, make sure that communications were shared to the right people. I'll use a real world example. Bus advertisement showed up, and there were member agencies that felt that they had not been informed or afforded the opportunity to weigh in on what that advertisement would look like. Well, actually they did. However, it was with the wrong person. And that wasn't communicated through that entire member agency. So looking at my staff that we have at Marin Wildfire, no one has the expertise on this type of topic or the bandwidth. So it came to me to be that person, to be that coordinator. And quite frankly, I did not have the time, energy, or the expertise. And so that's what generated the recommendations for the communications coordinator. An advantage of having Fire Safe Marin continue or step up their role as the coordination entity is that what we're asking out of the communications coordinator is a broad array of skills. Fire Safe Marin can bring that team approach to that broad array of skills. The downside is that position is also designed to hold Fire Safe Marin accountable to the contract, but also have that be embedded with Marin Wildfire, be able to tell the Marin Wildfire staff, especially when we need to be telling that story as now better than we ever have before. And so I can make an argument on both sides of the fence, but I lean towards having it be in-house with Marin Wildfire.
Any other comments? Director Goins.
Can I just make a comment? This is non-controversial, but page 27 to 40, the Ember Stomp project, the date for the projected Ember Stomp is September 6th of 2025. We need to update that line, please.
We'll time travel and do it again in 2025.
Okay. If there are no more comments from the committee, I will now take public comment. Is there anyone in the audience or online who would like to make a comment?
Certainly, we do have a comment here in the room, and then we also have one in the virtual environment. We'll take the in the room comment first, and then we'll go to the virtual environment. Just reminding those speaking this morning to please remember that comments may be no longer than 2 minutes in length and should be respectful to the community.
And could I ask you to say your name?
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Roger Meager. I serve on the board for Fire Safe Marin. Been there for over 20 years. I also serve as the board treasurer. First off, I'd like to thank this board here for your consideration and your questions and your comments thus far. Board Member Kohler, you've taken some of my comments and have your concerns that we're looking at. And one thing I'd like to bring up, and what Bill has said is that we have, and I think you know this, we have compiled a very dedicated and capable staff. And every day when I see their work, I'm surprised. The product they can put out, the quality of the product is second to none. And when we talk about the cuts we're looking at, it's a 22% cut in the budget, but as Bill illustrated, it's much more than that and actually what the deliveries are. But we also understand that you have competing demands for the money. There's only a certain amount of money out there. From us at Fire Safe Marin, we feel we're the priority. And there's other people that feel the same, but we appreciate the support from this group here, and we're going to talk with operations. But from a board standpoint, we would really like to see us totally funded so we can give that what we would call totally outrageous service. And through the years, it's expanded because the demand's expanded. Local agencies wanted additional things, so we put that in, and that's one thing we do is we meet the need of each and every agency, whatever that is, or try to do it the best we can. And our staff is very passionate and committed, and we need to support them in that to get this great product that they're putting out. So again, I thank you for your time and your consideration.
Just want to say thank you to Chief Meager, was our Ross Valley Fire Chief for a number of years. I didn't recognize you.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that input as well. And I have to remind everybody that Fire Safe Marin was here first before we were and built up a constituency before we were here. And so all of that is very appreciated. And so good luck with the Ops Committee today. Okay, are there any other public comments?
There are. We do have a public comment online. Please remember that your comment should be no longer than 2 minutes in length and should be respectful to the community. Looks like Steve Quarles, you should be able to speak now.
Hi, thanks very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks. So my name is Steve Quarles. I am also a board member of Fire Safe Marin. I am a Homestead Valley resident and the Homestead Valley Firewise Community Coordinator. I just like to start by saying overall, I think one of the major benefits of Measure C resulted in WPA was to provide a uniform message throughout the county. And I think that has been and should continue to be Fire Safe Marin. I think they've demonstrated their effectiveness in doing such a uniform message delivery. I've been interested in some of the comments by the board. I would say that as a result of so just as a slight background, I'm a retired scientist in wildfire home vulnerability kind of issues. And as a result of some of the fires that have resulted in major home losses, home hardening research has become a really popular research area. And so there is a never-ending need to sort of digest this research and extend it to the community. So, there's new stuff all the time coming out because of this interest. As a FireWise community coordinator, I want to just demonstrate to state the value of what Fire Safe Marin has done in terms of the ambassador program and the ability for communities to get free printed materials to hand out during their education events. So I think this is an important part of what we do. In dollar amount, it may not be so much, but I think it is an important component. And it is definitely, I think, a component that you appreciate.
Thank
And
you
I would
so much. I'm sorry, but your time is running out. So do you have one last comment?
One last comment. Yes, I do. So it was the comment that you made, someone on the board, about engaging parents. And just one example of that is Fire Safe Marin's leadership in Emberstomp in bringing to Emberstomp this Living with Fire program, Ember House, which is intended to engage kids, but more importantly, to engage the parents standing next to the kid. And this is just an example of what has happened in terms of reaching out to, I think, people that need to be reached out to. So that's
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you for your participation. All right. Are there any additional people online or present who would like to make a comment?
There are no additional comments at this time.
Okay. So back to the committee. Anybody else have a thought after this? Hearing none. Okay, there's no motion required. So we will move on to the next item, which is Board of Directors agenda review for the upcoming board meeting. So Mark will present this item.
We pretty much went through the meat and potatoes of what the May meeting is going to be. I've been doing everything I can to have only this be on the agenda. You will see a professional services agreement for the town of San Anselmo for our financial services. That'll be part of the budgeting for the 26-27 fiscal year. And then what that would turn into is a nomination from the board at our first fiscal year meeting to appoint San Anselmo as our fiscal agent. So that'll be in consent. We are pushing out our request for qualifications for proposals for the Ember Ready program again. We only had 2 applicants and they both came in late. So we are for our last RFP, so we're going to reissue that. And then June is stacking up to be a busy meeting because we're pushing everything off of the May meeting into June. It includes the biomass. It would include a proposal from the D-Space Alliance for a squad leader position, which is supported by all of the entities within the D-Space Alliance, but that's for June. But just so you know that June's stacking up to be a full meeting as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Anybody else have questions or comments on this item?
Did we agree on a timing for the strategic plan?
No, we're still working on that timing, especially since the operations committee has felt that they want to wrap up a little bit more with theirs and hand off a cleaner package from operations to the board than what is prepared now.
So I'm a little concerned about we're running into summer and we're running into, people not being available. So do you think you might have a proposal of a time by our
Yes.
full board meeting?
Yes, I'll work with Gene on that.
Oh, great. Okay.
Can I ask a procedural question? The agenda says we're supposed to review and approve the board agenda. Do you need a motion to approve the board agenda?
We never have before.
Okay, well, I'm
take-
new.
We'll take that language out.
Okay.
Take that
I
language out.
try to follow direction, not
And being reminded that in the consent calendar will be an RFP for our GIS consultants. Time to renew that.
Good, thank you. All right, any other questions or comments? Okay, so if there are no more, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much for your participation, for everybody who was involved. Thank you for coming. Mr. Meager, thank you. Okay, we're
Thanks,
adjourned.
everybody.